We are at chapter 40. Wolfwind followed the river Seamath all the way from the narrow sea to Castle Arlen itself. It was an astounding sight for the locals to see a wolf ship gliding unmolested and peaceful past their fields and villages so far inland. The many rivers, forts, and strong points which would normally have denied such progress to a Canadian ship now deferred to the fact that Princess Cassandra, personal standard, a stooping red hawk flew from the masthead. A message had been sent ahead of the warship's progress to make sure that local commanders recognized the standard and the fact that the voyage travelers upriver in peace. It was also something of a novelty for Eric and his crew. Finally, they rounded the last bend in the river, and there before them was the soaring spires of the turrets of Castle Arlen. Eric drew breath in wonder at the sight of it. Holt, watching him, was sure that, as well as the sheer admiration the castle inspired, Eric's old plundering instincts were at work. Estimating just how much treasure the castle could contain, he stepped close to the Aubergine and said softly, "You'd never make it past the moat." Eric stared in surprise and looked round at the ranger. Then he grinned a little ruefully. "Was it so obvious that I was thinking about it?" he asked, and Holt nodded in confirmation. "You wouldn't be a Canadian if you weren't," he said. There was a landing stage jutting out into the river, becked with flags and bunting, and a large crowd was awaiting their arrival. At the sight of the warship, they began sounding horns and cheering. "That's a first," Eric said mildly, bringing a grin to his Holt's face. "And there's another," he said, pointing discreetly to a tall, bearded figure standing a little way back from the landing stage, surrounded by an expensively dressed retinue of knights and ladies. That's the king himself, come down to welcome you, Eric." "More likely he's here for his daughter," the Canadian replied, but Holt noticed that he did look a little pleased with himself. Evelyn had seen the tall man now and was standing in the prow of the warship, waving excitedly. The cheers from the shore redoubled at the sight of her, and now Duncan was leading the way down the landing stage, lengthening his strides so that he was almost running, not content to stand back and preserve his royal dignity. "Oars," called Eric, and the brothers raised their oars. Dripping, raised their oars dripping from the water as the warship glided smoothly alongside the landing stage. The Scandinavian crew passed mooring lines to those on shore, the two parties regarding each other with deep interest. It was the first time in memory that Arelans and Canadians had been face to face without weapons in their hands. Will, his face alight with the joy of the moment, leapt onto the warship's railing as Evelyn hurried to the entry point in the ship's waist. She and her father, their hearts too full for words, simply smiled at one another over the decreasing gap as the line handlers hauled up the ship into the landing stage. Then the wick workers' fenders bumped and groaned, and the ship was fast alongside. Svengel, grinning broadly at her, unlatched the entry port in the ship's rail, and she leapt into her father's arms, burying her face in his chest. "Dad!" she cried once, her voice muffled by his shirt and by the sobs that welled up in her throat. "Cassie," he murmured, his pet name for her from when she was a toddler, and the cheering intensified. Duncan was a popular king, the people knew how much pain the loss of his daughter had caused him. Even the Canadians were grinning at the scene. Roughnecks and foreboarders as they were, they had their sentimental side, and they valued the bonds of family. In the middle of all the joy and celebration, only Holt stood apart. His face was a mask of pain and misery, and he remained unobtrusively by the steering oar as the stern of the ship, as the others surged forward to the waist. Duncan and Evelyn, or Cassandra as her father knew her, stood in each other's embrace, oblivious to those around them. Will, scanning the crowd, saw a heavily built form in the ranks behind the king, a middle-aged man who was waving enthusiastically at him, shouting his name. "Will, welcome home, boy, welcome home!" For a moment Will was puzzled. Then he recognized Baron Arold, a man who for years had been a stern-faced figure of authority. Now he was waving and yelling like a schoolboy on holiday. Will dropped lightly to the planks of this landing stage and made his way through the crowds of well-wished to the Baron. He began to make a formal bow when the Baron grabbed his hand and started pumping it enthusiastically. "Never mind that. Welcome home, lad, and well done, well done. My God, I thought we'd never see you again. Wasn't that right, Rodney?" He spoke this last to the mail-clad knight beside him, and Will recognized Sir Rodney, head of the battle school at Castle Redmond. He realized that the knight was anxiously scanning the faces on the deck of the warship. "Yes, yes, my lord," he agreed distractedly. Then he seized Will's other arm and said urgently, "Will, I thought Horace was with you. Don't tell me something's happened to him." Puzzled, Will looked to where Horace was shaking hands with his Canadian crew, farewelling friends among them before he came ashore. "That's him there," he pointed Horace out for Sir Rodney, and had the satisfaction of seeing the knight's jaws drop in surprise. "My God, he's turned into a giant," he gasped. Then Horace recognized his mentor and marched briskly through the crowd, coming to attention and saluting his fist to his right breast. Apprentice Horace reporting, Battlemaster, permission to return to duty, sir," he said crisply. Coming to attention himself, Rodney returned the salute. "Permission granted, Apprentice." Then, formalities over, he seized the muscular apprentice in a bear hug and danced him around a few undignified steps, all the while crying, "Damn me, boy, you've done us all proud. And what the devil did you get so tall? And when the devil did you get so tall?" Once again the crowd cheered with delight. Then, all at once, a silence fell over them, and Will turned to see the reason. Eric, stout follower, Obadiah of the Canadians, was stepping ashore. Instinctively, those nearest him drew back a little. Old habits died hard. Will, not wishing to see his friend insulted, started forward impulsively, but there was one other in the crowd who was quicker off the mark. Duncan, King of Ireland, stepped forward to greet his Canadian counterpart, his hand extended in friendship. "Welcome to Ireland, Obadiah," he said, "and thank you for bringing my daughters safely home." And with that, the two leaders shook hands. Then the cheering started again, and this time for Eric and his crew, so that the Canadians looked about them with delight, and that, thought Will, was going to make it a little harder for them to raid here again in the years to come. Duncan let the cheering go on for a little while, then held up his hand for silence. He searched the faces of the dock. Then, not seeing the one he looked for, he let his gaze swing to the warship. "Halt," he said softly, finally seeing him, wrapped as ever in the ranger's cloak and standing alone by the great steering oar. The king held out a hand and gestured to the dock. "Come ashore, Holt. You're home." But Holt stood awkwardly, unable to master the sadness that he felt. His voice broke as he began to speak, and he gathered himself and started again. Your Majesty, the year of banishment still has 3 weeks to run," he said at last. A low buzz of comment ran through the crowd. Will, unable to restrain himself, reacted in total surprise. "Banishment? You were banished," he said incredulously. He looked at the king. It was unthinkable that Holt, with his unwavering loyalty to Ireland and his people, should be banished. "Why?" he said. The word hung in the air. Sorry, I'm just wiping my eyes because I'm crying. Anyway, Duncan shook his head, dismissing the matter. "A few incautious words, that was all. He was drunk, and we've all forgotten what he said, and I forgive him, so for God's sake, man, come ashore." But Holt remained where he was. "Your Majesty, nothing would make me happier, but you must uphold the law," he said in a low voice. Then another speaker chimed in, Lord Anthony, the King's Chamberlain. "Holt is right, Your Majesty," he said. "Anthony was a well-mannered man, but he tended to be a little pedantic when it came to interrupting the law. After all, he did say, you have the issue of an enforcer between your father and a travelling hatcher dancer." There was a gasp of horror from the crowd. Duncan smiled thinly, said through gritted teeth, "Thank you for reminding us all, Anthony." But then a peal of helpless laughter rang out, and Princess Cassandra doubled over, hooting in a most unroyal fashion. Every eye turned to her. Slowly, she recovered enough to speak. "I'm so sorry, everyone, but if you ever knew my grandmother, you'd understand why my grandfather might have been tempted. Grandma had a face like a robber's dog and a temperament to match it." "Cassie," her father said in his most disapproving tone, but she was holding her side and laughing again, and he couldn't keep a smile from forming in his lips. Then he left Lord Anthony's disapproving stare on him, and he recovered, nudging Cassandra until her laughter subsided into a series of choked snuffles and snorts. The laughter had been effective, however, and it took a while for the assembled crowd to come to order. Throughout all this, Holt remained standing stiffly on the deck of the warship. Duncan turned to his chamberlain and said, in his most reasoning tone, "Surely, Anthony, it's within my powers to pardon Holt for the last 3 weeks of this sentence." But Anthony frowned and shook his head. "It would be most irregular, Your Majesty," he said heavily. "Such a thing would see unfortunate precedents in law." "King Duncan," boomed Eric, and instantly he had the attention of everyone there. He realized he'd spoken a little more forcibly than he intended. He was still getting the hang of these formal occasions. Now he continued at a more moderate level. "Perhaps I could request that you grant his pardon as a gesture of goodwill to seal the treaty between our 2 countries." "Good thinking," muttered Duncan. He turned quickly toward Anthony. "Well," he said. The chamberlain pursed his lips thoughtfully. It was never his wish to deny the king what he wanted. He merely tried to do his duty and uphold the law. Now he saw a loophole and seized upon it gratefully. "Such a request wouldn't set any precedents, Your Majesty," he said, "and this is a very special occasion after all." "So be it," said Duncan quietly, and turned to face the figure on the warship. "All right, Holt, you're pardoned, so for God's sake, come ashore and let's have a drink to celebrate." Holt, tears in his eyes, set foot on Ireland soil once more, after 11 months and 5 days of banishment. As he came ashore to the renewed cheers of the crowd, those around him saw another man dressed in a grey-green cloak, who slipped forward and pressed something into his hand. "You might be needing this again," said Crowley, commander of the Ranger Corps, and when Holt looked down, he saw a thin chain in his hand, with a silver oak leaf insignia on it, and then he knew he was really, really home. Oh man, that was so sad. Okay, right. I'd like to thank you for listening to read up to chapter 40. If you'd like to listen to me read chapter 41, then please stay posted, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Hopefully I won't be crying next time. I'd like to thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.